Hello CS112, today I'll be going over a quick solution to lab 4 which has to do with loops. In this lab you needed to create a function called print triangle which would take in an integer parameter called height, and you would need to print out a triangle with that height where each row increments by 2 stars every single row. So in this case you start out with 1, the next row will have 3, then 5, then 8, so on and so forth, and you can do it with a variable amounts of heights here. So I've kind of just coded up the function signature as well as the test cases that it gives down here. Let's just dive right into it. So we got to think about, before we actually start coding, what we want to do and sort of break apart how this function works. So it looks like we're going to want to iterate through height amount of times, and then within iterating through this height amount of times, we want to iterate a variable amount of times to print out these stars here, since the star value is changing every single time. So in this case, that would require a nested loop. So the first loop will just be iterating the height amount of times, whereas the inner loop will be iterating enough times to print enough stars so we can continue. And in order to do that, we are going to need to set a second, kind of like a counter variable to keep us incrementing each of these to be incremented by 2 every time. So I am going to create an end variable, set end equal to 2. That will make more sense in a second. But I'm going to say for I in range heights, because that's the first thing I said we have to do. Our outer loop is just going to iterate through each of the levels of the heights. And then next we're going to say for j in range, and then I'm going to say 1 and end. Now, why am I saying 1 and ends? Well, in this case, we're going to start out with 2. So the range 1, 2 will just iterate once. Once we increment end by another 2, then it will do 1, 2, 3, and then ends. Then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then ends. Sorry, my mental math is off, but I'll explain later. I'm doing this in Python Visualizer, so we can step through this later. But I'm going to want to actually do the printing here, and it's very important that we actually alter the end of our print statement, because implicitly there is a new line at the end, and these are all on the same line. However, once this inner loop is done iterating, I do want to have a new line. So I'm just going to say print. And if you just print nothing, what Python will actually see is it will see a new line character in here. So what it's seeing is this. It's implicit though, you don't actually need to do it. In fact, that might actually pad on 2 new lines. I'm not actually sure, but anyways. And like I said before, we want to increment our actual end variable here so we can continue increasing by 2 here. So I know I went through this pretty quickly, but I want to spend most of the time actually stepping through this in Python Visualizer. So the very first thing I want to do is, first I'm going to check if I didn't make any mistakes. So that looks good to me just upon initial inspection. As you can see, this is with 3, this is with 4, this is with 5, and this is with 10. That looks pretty similar to this. You guys can count it out if you want, but I trust myself. Let's go ahead and just go back to the very first function call, which is with 3. So let's see what's happening here. I like Python Visualizer for lists because it helped me learn lists when I was first learning how to code. So obviously, if it's going to start by reading the function definition, it's going to go all the way down to the function call before entering this code block. And then once it enters it, it sees my end equals 2 variable. So it creates an end2 variable, just showing us what the variable equals here. Now I'm going to iterate through the range of height. So in this case, I is going to start out at 0, which is what we're expecting. And now for j in range 1 ends, so that's going to just be the number 1, because from 1 to 2 exclusively, that's just 1. So it's just going to print out one of these, it's going to end, and then it's going to print out a new line. So once it prints this out here, it's going to print out a new line, which we can't actually see, but it has now gone down to here. And we're going to say end plus equals 2. So in this case, it's going to change to 4. So you can see it did. And then we're just going to continue going through the same thing. So I is going to iterate going to the next level of the height that we need, and it's going to, go 5 times because the height is 5. And then within this inner loop here, that's what's going to iterate through the range of what we need from our actual rows, which is increasing by 2. So now instead of just iterating once, we increased it by 2. So now we'll iterate 3 times. So as you can see, 1, 2, and 3. It's now printed out 3 of these guys, so on and so forth. And 2 again was end again was incremented by 2. And if I was to just power through this, as you can see, it will increase by 2 again, so on and so forth. So I did think that, especially if you guys have started Project 3, this is a pretty straightforward thing. But if you guys have any questions on loops, do let us know in Piazza.